There's no sound, just so y'all know. Hey y'all, there's no sound if you guys can hear.
Can you hear us now?
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you for telling us. All right.
First, I want to say thank you to everyone on the committee and everyone on the board for this committed to this work. This is the first major revision in the past 9 years. The last amendments were minor and necessary due to the pandemic. When this process began, there were a lot of questions that were raised, and given the general expansive recommendations, as mentioned in Robert's Rules of Order, and I mentioned in my chair report, changes by the bylaws that are so extensive in general that they're scattered throughout the bylaws should be effected through a substitution of an entirely new set of bylaws called a revision. In other words, in the case of a revision, the assembly, or in our case, the community board, it is not confined to consideration only of the points that were raised in the changes, but is included in the proposed revision as submitted by the committee that is drafted. The revision can be perfected by first degree and second degree amendments, but as in the case of any other bylaw amendment, what this means is that all members of our body can discuss the proposed changes, which may or may not be adopted. That's part of it. It's about the inclusive process. So that's the wonky bit out of the way. I applaud all of the executive committee's work. I look forward to this being handled. But the thing I want to remind everyone is when you make changes to an operational document, you're trying to fix problems. There's always more than one way to solve a problem. Right? Nils and I have known this, having worked together, that there are many ways, like the old saying, the Skinner cat. Part of this task before the committee is to examine and determine the best solution. It may come from the previous draft, it may be proposed here at this committee, and incorporated from a sister community board, or a member may contribute a potential solution. In any event, it is prudent for the committee to determine which is a better solution that may have a less negative, a possible positive impact, if any. That is why this committee will weigh out the pros and cons. Each member selected for this committee will each have to live with the long-term impacts from this collective work. But for the long-term health of our organization, Community Board 11, the committee should take careful consideration and include an inclusive approach to this provision, guided by its co-chairs, Adam Breha and Kenneth Crouch. And I appreciate all your stewardship, and I'm going to leave you to handle this independently, but I'm always here at your disposal.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, David. Can I say something briefly?
Of course. You don't have to ask me.
Oh, amazing, thank you. Folks, this is not the way I wanted to start this, but this is also not how we'll finish it. I know that we have such a committee group of people here that are really, aligned with the views of the community, the dreams of the community, and folks who I know will build something that will last far beyond us. And so I appreciate everyone coming in on time. I'll do my best to make sure that I'm also on time in the future, but really excited to work with every one of you and make sure that we create a really long-lasting, important, flexible document.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to move to the presentation discussions. Kenneth, I don't know if you want to speak to this first, or I can do it. It's up to you. And then obviously we'll let everybody on the committee kind of.
I'm gonna pass the time to you first, then I'll come back and so.
All right, you got it. All right, so we'll get into a discussion. I think just preliminary thoughts. Scope of the work for the committee. I think we're going to examine the document in its totality. So how we do that. There can be other ideas. I think the ideas that me and Kenneth had, and we spoke with Angel as well, was to try to kind of break this off into themes. So we have elections process, attendance, officer and staff responsibilities, committee and vice chair responsibilities, parliamentary procedure. Ideally, that's how we'll do it. There might be other things that I'm missing here. And I think what we're trying to get tonight is a sense of what people might be interested in and how we break that up. And then anything that doesn't fit into one of those buckets, we'll figure out how to address that. Jessica, you sent an email about the charter revisions that I believe are, the mayor has set up a commission, but city council is also looking at the charter. And I agree with your suggestion that that fall into the purview of this committee. These charter revisions will impact us. So I think as we go through this process, we should keep an eye on that because obviously how we shape our bylaws will be impacted by those revisions. And there is nothing, I guess, finalized with that, but there is fear that some of these revisions may be looking to strip community boards of even, I would say what our already limited powers are. And so I definitely think in the sake of preserving the voice of the board, that would be important. All right, so that's all I have to say on this. Now, Kenneth, I don't know if you'd like to share anything, and then obviously whoever wants to speak to this, raise your hands.
Yeah, I'll just very briefly say, our main goal is to have buy-in across the community board. So to the extent, and we know that there are parts of this revision process that some people have more interest in, that are more, that speak to their interests, their goals. We want to make sure that this is truly a democratic document. So included in that scope is, we have a public participation, we have, and we will want to make sure that we communicate this to the full board and that we're all on the same page as we go through this process.
Great. Anybody else? Jessica?
Just to, sorry, to build on the commission revisions, while I think you agree, and it's great that part of the task of this committee should be to stay apprised of those potential changes. I think many of those changes also fall under the purview of existing committees. So it would be understood that we would be working in coordination with those existing committees on any response to a charter revision issue, correct?
Yeah, I mean, yes, thank you for that. And, well, we'll get to that later, but yeah, I appreciate that. Okay, anybody else? Yeah, of course.
I looked at page 6 of the current bylaws as of September 28, 2021, where it says that members shall conduct themselves appropriately. I'm going to read the first paragraph. Failure to comply with this provision shall include conduct unbecoming of a member at full board meetings, committee meetings, public hearings, and any other meetings of the board, misconduct of a substantial nature, conduct indicating the neglect of duty on the part of a member, or conduct materially impairing the ability of the member to perform such member's official duties. I say this because last Tuesday was a little not following the bylaws. And I have a question. I want to know that everybody here read what Adam sent everybody a copy of the bylaws, and everybody read it, because I don't know how you can discuss something if you don't know what's already part of the bylaws.
Actually, I appreciate that, because I was going to ask for a show of hands. And this isn't to shame anyone, because if you haven't read it, it's okay. We're not, Kenneth, I think we'll agree that tonight we're going to kind of go through some preliminary things, but I totally agree. By next month, I think the expectation is that everybody has read these. No one's supposed to commit this to memory, but at least to have, I think, a general sense of what the bylaws say. And I would read the city charter portion that specifically pertains to community boards, which is not that long, surprisingly. So it's a pretty easy read. Jose?
Sorry, I only got like 3 hours of sleep last night. But I would hope that these bylaws, that our board in general just runs on a lot of common sense. Now, and we don't go out of our way to overly complicate these bylaws. I don't think the goal is to, make it as complicated as possible. I think our customs in the board are as important as Robert rules are. Like, our customs are also important. And as long as those customs are consistent, those are, because they're mentioned in the bylaws, and I actually got to read it. I have to say, this is the first time I read them, and I've been on this community board 16 years, You know, I kind
I
of like
appreciate the
staying.
honesty.
I kind of like staying in my little track of the world, right? I was in public safety and echo, I'm a businessman, I know how that works. This wasn't really, sometimes, for whatever reason, I had in my head that this was gonna be like, oh my God, this is entailing, like, this 200-page brief that I had to go through, I've been sued before. But, it wasn't really, I think 30 minutes max. I think that would be my only hope, that this bylaws committee just follows the common sense. I think we should use that and not necessarily go out of our way to, like sabotage ourselves and by making it too complicated as well. So, thank you.
Joel?
Thank you.
No.
So, yeah, I agree with Valerie in terms of, maybe if everybody read the bylaws, they would have noticed that, that section, because I would agree in terms of, the level of unprofessionalism that took place on during our full board meeting. And yes, I've been, so maybe some of you don't know, but this is not my first time on this board. I was on this board many years ago and involved with the bylaws then. So this is not a new process for me, and I welcome everyone's comments as we move forward. And I thank you too for stepping up in terms of co-chairing this particular committee, because it can be difficult, I realize that. So thank you.
Thank you. Kenneth, sorry, go ahead, say.
It feels like we're kind of doing like introductory, statements.
Yeah. That's good.
So I'll say, I've wanted this bylaws committee to exist for like almost 2 years now. So I'm grateful that it does. I also noticed going through it that there are some things that are like pretty vague, like these sections of the like members' conduct. It's like, how do you define, like we all have this like sense that like that was unprofessional what happened last year, but there are no like real rules written down except like a vibe check. And so what Jose just mentioned, sort of his expectation that it might be like 200 pages, but upon like opening it up, it's 26 pages. I think that means that we have some room where we can add things that make this like work better for us without it getting to the point of it being overly complicated. And I think there are many things that we can add that'll make everything run more smoothly and for people to have more faith in like the processes rather than it all being sort of at the whim of a handful of people.
That's, yeah, and I would agree with that. I think more than worrying about the length of the document, which I agree, I think if we're gonna go into some of these things more to lay out clear rules, I think it's just that we keep the language as simple as possible. Not because people aren't smart enough to read it, but it's just, there's no need to overly complicate these things. If it could be something I think is straightforward is what does member conduct really mean, or what's appropriate conduct, that we just lay it out, like what exactly, and it's not rocket science. It's like, just how do we expect to treat one another? We can politely disagree. That's the whole point. If we all agreed every time, we'd only need one person on this board. So, yeah, I think, thank you for that. Kenneth, if there's nothing else, do you want to,
Should we get to?
Derek, yeah, go ahead.
Derek Scampo, CB11M member, not a member of this committee. I want to thank all of you for taking on this additional responsibility. I have full faith that you will work hard on this and collaborate with all of us. I was hoping I could speak to one of the pieces of scope that you mentioned.
Yep.
Regarding the parliamentary procedure. I think what we witnessed at the last full board, and continuing on from the executive, I did go back and watch the whole thing. A lot of points of failure along the way, and I think parliamentary procedure played a really important part as to why things got out of hand. Speaking for myself, you may agree or disagree. I think that as a board, we have to do a better job following it. We have to do a better job speaking into the microphone, recognizing either side, right? Speaking for and against motions and not just pontificating, asking questions before a motion is made. Not being so concerned with the person who gets to put the motion in and the second and having their name in the agenda and in the minutes, but actually like speaking to these things. And as much as I know bylaws can improve that, I encourage all of you and the board, the larger board, also think about standing rules right? What is it gonna look like when we debate something, that there actually will be a debate, that there will be people lining up on either side to speak for and against? I haven't really seen that in my year on the board, and I think it is part of the reason why those things are getting so contentious, because we're not actually having people speak for and against the motion, they're just going off. And then dispensing with motions as they come in. And then lastly, sort of really following these things that need to be followed. I'll just speak for myself here. In my opinion, it was very clear that that motion at the last full board about removing the member never should have gone before the full board. Plainly stated, the motion never should have gone a second time at an executive. And I think if we can do a better job through the bylaws and through standing rules, there wouldn't have been that confusion that would have gone down that then spilled over into the full board meeting. And then laying out other ways to have gone about that. Perhaps that motion could have just made brand new at the full board and been debated on the spot there. But I know for myself, it's why I had to vote the way I did at the last full board. And again, I really feel like it was a failure following a parliamentary procedure. While Robert's Rules of Order are not a means to an end, they are a way to get there, right? It's not just about following the rules for rules' sake, but for us to get to a solution. And so I encourage all of you to think about that. All of the other things are certainly important. I'm not belittling those things. But if we want to be respectable in our work, I think it's really important. Walking out of that meeting, it felt like a laughing stock by the end. And the members of the community I walked out with were laughing. And I think that's really something we all have to take to heart. So thank you for hearing my comments. Again, thank you for the work that you're going to do on this committee.
Thank you.
Thank you, Darren. So what's the key?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'd like everyone, if they have a copy, to turn to the proposed revisions. So we're all literally on the same page. And so I think, what we have from Vice Chair Jessica Elliott is a really good foundation for us to look, to analyze, and potentially adopt, maybe reject some things, take others, but really just to build upon this document. And so in working with them, from working with Angel, our goal is to kind of review the work that we have in front of us, the proposed revisions, and really add our own ideas to those documents. And I think we can take this portion of the meeting now to have community members, board members, share their ideas as to some of these revisions and kind of percolate those ideas. And then I don't know if you want to add something to that.
No, I agree with everything you said. I think we also have, in addition to that, an email from our board chair with a couple of suggestions there as well. So I don't think it hurts. We don't have to go through everything tonight, but I think we can go through the recommendations in this email as well as some of the recommendations in this proposed revision, and just, we'll see how many we want to do, and then we'll just kind of get a feedback on that. And I did want to say, I forgot to say something about the I think the way with the scope of work is, I think once we agree, like what groups we're gonna, like what themes we're gonna set up, we'll send out an email and just kind of, I guess, gauge people's interest in what they would kind of like to work on. If everybody picks the same thing, then we'll have, to figure out how to start to, put people on things they might not be thrilled to working on. But I think the idea that we joined this committee is that we're probably pretty interested in the whole thing, obviously maybe some parts more than others. With that said, Kenneth, I don't know if you. Go ahead.
Information regarding the suggested procedure in distributing work, should that be part of the public record or no?
I don't know, Angel, for that.
I don't think it hurts. I think we want to gauge members' interest first, if that makes sense, and then apportion need after that.
I mean, we can go back to, if people want to, because I did ask if there were any suggestions. Otherwise, I outlined some of them that are on the record that will be those topics: parliamentary procedure, attendance, elections processes. I think that there needs to be more clarity on committee chairs' responsibilities, especially vice chairs, and really outlining in detail what those responsibilities are. I think to touch on what Derek said, about, people's concerns and sometimes with just getting their name on the agenda. I see it the same way with sometimes people wanting to have a title of a vice chair or an assistant secretary or an assistant treasurer and so on. So I think the idea there is to really set up a guide so we know if those people are performing their tasks. I think it's a little bit vague right now what a vice chair does, what a assistant. Well, we'll have to talk about those other things. So, and then even our board chair, our secretary, our vice chair, our staff, what roles and responsibilities they have, what would be, I think more detail on the collaboration between the staff and the chair, the vice chair. There seems to have been confusion on that as well. And I think, those were the major topics that I've heard, and they're not my ideas as much as I feel like they've been the things that we've been deliberating a lot. So Jessica, I mean, those have been kind of set into the record. And I think we'll include the revisions. I think we'll assign some people to kind of keep an eye on the charter revisions from city council and the mayor. That's not as essential, but I do think that it would be good to have that being done in collaboration. So does anybody else have, and it doesn't have to be said tonight, but does anyone else have some general grouping of a topic that they would like to say that I haven't stated? And again, things that aren't lumped into here, doesn't mean we won't address them as well. All right, so Jessica, then Sage.
So in our discussion thus far, I think one of the things that came up that could use a better definition is this interest in definitions. Some of the language, it's a legal document, commonality that some things are defined in order to be able to refer to that definition collectively. So, it may be worth combing the document and identifying some of, if there are any terms that come up that we're using, to Jose's point, in a common sense way. We think we all collectively understand them, but in some cases, in order to operate, you have to be able to refer to a definition that's not a collective understanding. So for the purpose of it being a functional document, considering whether there's a set of definitions that may or may not be needed, it may be unnecessary, but where it's come up that there are specific terms that may serve as useful as having a definition. I would suggest that some definitions be considered.
Okay.
I'm in favor of changing the composition of like the office oversight committee to folding in a standing bylaws committee, which also is responsible for enforcing parliamentary procedure. And like constantly, if this is a living document, just coming up with like, as they go on, once this group disbands, future additions to resolve any disputes that might come up or issues that the bylaws could correct.
I think that's great. Yeah, actually, that reminds me of something I forgot. Just when I was combing through the revisions, the proposed revisions, et cetera, I think this committee is able to decide if we do need other committees. I think one of the other issues that this board has had is integrating new members into the board. There's really no orientation process, et cetera. I've had the idea of potentially creating an onboarding committee that new members would have to sit on, and that existing members would obviously, we can rotate that because it's not it could be a 3 or 4 month thing a year. The appointments happen. I know it won't be perfect because sometimes people are appointed at different times of the year, but it could be an idea. It's just an idea. Somebody might have a better way of phrasing that. So that's just something else that I thought about. And all right, so Jose and then Kenneth, I think you could run it with B, and then I'll step in where when I was opportunity.
Just in general, I was interested in a few revisions. I think that in this we can work out in the priority however it wants. But I think that a committee chairperson should be able to choose their vice chair at their discretion. Obviously, it could be with the council of the chairperson, but I still believe that that responsibility should fall on the chairperson If you're going to run a committee, you should be able to choose someone that you're going to run with and have some kind of dynamic. And this hasn't been an issue because obviously the chairs that we've had have been very responsive, but this, the bylaws are something that should fix problems going forward, right? They're not something that should fix one problem. These are the way that we fix problems. I've noticed in the time that I've been here that there have been individuals that run to join, they're new members, they've run to join land use. They have been there for a purposeful, like, situation, or rezoning or a project or anything. And as soon as that's done, they're gone. And I've seen it happen at least 3 to 4 times. I think that there should be no member being on, there should be like a requirement of 1 full term, which means 2 years. For anyone being on land use, anyone like running for office even. I think they should get to know the committee, they should get to know the layout of the board before, particularly that committee, which I have never been on land use. Never, I've actually, well, it's different stuff. But, but a lot of the future changes, like how this East Harlem looks in 20 years depends on that committee, right? It is probably our strongest committee in terms of future bound and perspective. And I believe that I've seen it. I've seen a few individuals take advantage of that particular committee in their disregard. And as soon as their thing gets approved, they're gone. So I feel that that should be something that we should incorporate on the way, so.
Sorry, point of clarification. You brought up 2 issues, right, Jose? One,
3 actually.
committee chairs should be able to select their vice chair,
Mhm.
and 2, being generally about committee appointments. Is that?
Not committee appointments. What I said was that I believe that no one should be running for office on the community board or
When you say
Land on-
office, you mean like
like
an officer, like a
chairperson, vice chairperson, secretary, or be on the particular committee of land use and development if they had not served at least 1 full term, which is a 2-year term, all of us are 2-year terms.
All right, thank you. Asher?
Alright, I brought this up at one of the executive meetings. I think that there should be more of, like you mentioned, like clear indication and like, sorry, I'm tired. For vice chairs of committees, like more clear like what their duties are, cause I feel like right now it's kind of just in general in the bylaws, it's kind of they're just there. Like it's just they assist the chair, but then it's like, what does that really mean? I also don't think that you should be a vice chair or chair of a committee if you haven't been here for a full term.
That's a good point.
And also just for like committees in general, I feel like when you apply for a committee, it should be, you have to say why you have an interest in that committee. Cause I've seen people come to youth and education and they think it's just gonna be an easy thing, they don't know nothing about what's being in the school, what goes on in schools and stuff like that, or higher education. I'm just speaking from my experience, or they just don't show up. Cause that's the easy committee to join. You have everyone wanting to join youth and education, here I am without one, so.
Thank you. I feel like we've already we're in B, which is fine. And we were gonna have a portion where people kind of said what their ideas were, and then we can kind of go through some of the stuff that's already written. So, go ahead.
So before you move on,
Yeah, we're not moving on, so,
Okay.
yeah, you're good.
My concern is board members who have like multiple positions on the board. They're on the executive committee, they're an officer, and they're a chair, they're co-chair, and I'm talking like one person. I think a person should have one role. They should not be the co-chair and a chair and then an officer. So please look at that as well.
Okay.
There's enough people here. that
We'll
I can
look into
spread-
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's enough people here that we can spread out the roles there.
Yeah, and I think that we have to figure out things that could get people more involved. I agree with you. It does feel like it's a small group that's kind of responsible for a lot. And, I mean, I wouldn't hold that against that group. I feel like they're stepping up, and I actually think a lot of them would welcome not having so much on their plates. I think we're all busy, and we do so. So we're all volunteering. We all have other things. So it's a lot of work when somebody's got all of those roles. I would agree, and I'll say that as someone who does full transparency. Okay, Kenneth, there are no other hands. I guess let's go through some of these. We'll start with these proposed revisions for March 18th. If you want to go through some, read them out, then I'll go through some. I guess the ones we're looking at in the beginning don't seem that complicated, so it'd be a good starting point, and then we can move. We can also review this email. That's why you printed it. So if you want to, go ahead, take the board.
Yeah, so, I'm assuming everyone has the document in front of them, the broad summary of proposed changes. And I think the goal is we don't want, perfectly anything. So we really want to make sure that if there are things that we think we can tackle today, things that, maybe don't wade into broader, deeper issues that we may need to think more about, then we should tackle those things. Or at least have some sort of formalized recommendation for the full board to communicate back to the board what we're working on. So, starting first with the proposed revisions dated March 18, 2025. We have first removal of assistant secretary position. And should I speak a little bit more about that?
I mean, you can. I think it's
pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah. I will say that I don't think we've had an assistant secretary. Am I wrong, for a number of months now?
Well, technically, when Michelle was secretary, and she can correct me if I'm wrong, she was assistant secretary, then the secretary stepped down, and she, even though she technically was still assistant secretary, she was acting as.
And like the only, right.
Yeah.
Well, does Rosa have an assistant right now?
No.
No. And how long has that been?
A year.
So I think that, in my opinion, as a member of this committee, makes the point for the removal. I don't think the board has had an issue without it. I think I kind of wrote notes on every one of these points, and I think that, like, when the secretary is not present at a full board meeting, right? Because that could be then the issue when you don't have an assistant. It's kind of looking into, like, could that be delegated to someone else? I mean, could the vice chair step up and do that? Could it's as simple as taking attendance. I think we'll get into the attendance, but it does seem to me, and then I guess we'll go around the table and see how everyone feels, that I'm kind of for removing it. Obviously, when we remove it, if we do, we need to figure out what we would do if a secretary was not present at a meeting, because that would be an issue. Yeah, go ahead. Jewel, I guess, then Jessica, then Sage.
Yeah, I'm of the opposite opinion, because basically, for both those positions, so the point is, when the secretary is not there, there's an assistant secretary. If you're gonna say, okay, there's gonna be a, as you just said, in like someone else will take that over, that's fine. But, we don't, in terms of a treasurer in particular, if you read the bylaws, we're not in compliance with the treasurer, because we haven't seen how to report, and we don't get regular reports. So, and so, there had been an assistant, so if the treasurer's not there, there's an assistant, so the treasurer, there's a responsibility there. They do report, if they can't make the actual meeting, then let's let the assistant treasurer or some other person provide the report. So that's stopping board business by not having a treasurer or assistant treasurer. Let me just talk about the assistant position. I think there needs to be some person identified to take that role over. If you don't want to call it assistant secretary or assistant treasurer, fine, but there should be some other person there. That's just it.
Jessica?
My understanding of why these roles exist in the first place is exactly for the reason that happened with Michelle sort of, taking on the position when if something happens, there is a plan in place to allow operations to continue smoothly. While we have not prioritized is establishing an elections committee to fill those positions. That's why they've been vacant. I think they are there as part of the set of rules that are intended to keep operations moving smoothly in the event of some emergency. By removing them, I think it opens up some risk for dysfunction in the future if things happen. I am where there is also a stated interest in cultivating pipelines to leadership. These are prime opportunities for those kind of potential pipelines to be filled. So while they seem redundant and unnecessary now because we have not necessarily utilized them, I think it is perhaps a reflection of our underutilization of the affordances that our current standing bylaws provide us with.
Okay, I mean, I'll just say, in response to that, I mean, that, I'm not saying I disagree. Perhaps the problem has been that it hasn't been effective. It's not just that we've had vacancies now. These positions, I've been on forever and they have not. So maybe it's as simple as making it more clear. And if, there's a certain period where an assistant treasurer secretary isn't performing their duty, they're removed and we have another special election or something of that line. So then Sage, Asher, and then if there's no one else on the committee, we'll recognize like Michelle. And Nilsa, then Michelle. No, people here should go first.
Yeah, no, I think, I agree with what Jessica said. I think the purpose of that is just to have like a smooth like line of succession. And I, again, pushing for like the oversight committee. I think if there was somebody who would just say like we were not in compliance with the bylaws because right now nobody has created an elections committee to fill these vacancies, then the vacancies would probably get filled, and there's already a provision in the bylaws where if nobody volunteers to run for those, the chair can appoint somebody. So I think it's all about like having some structure through which people make sure that the rules are being followed. And secondary, it's not a specific thing, but I think it might be helpful just to go through exactly what like the timeline of this is, what our deliverables are.
That's gonna be the next agenda topic.
Okay, I think that might be helpful before we get into like the specifics of the recommendations.
Okay, so I mean,
Do you mean the timeline for each discrete change or just for the broader work that we're doing?
Like how long are we going to discuss? Like you mentioned, like we can have something today to bring to the full board.
In theory, right? I mean, we can be ambitious here, but yeah.
Okay.
or you even said more of a report on the work we're doing, maybe
Right.
positions.
Some combination of the two.
Positions we're planning to take. We don't have to rush it if people aren't comfortable. I mean, I don't know, Kenneth, is there anything that, in the spirit of rules, that would, if everybody would want to go into the timeline and then circle back to this? But I'll recognize the hands that are up first because I don't want to go out of order with that. So we have Asher, Nilsa, then Michelle, and then if we want to, I don't think the timeline is that long of a conversation, and we can circle back.
To be honest, no one runs for these positions. We're having trouble filling the regular position. At this point, our turnover on this board is ridiculous. It's more new members than experienced members. It's really, I don't see a point of keeping these two if we can't even get the regular positions filled. And that's the whole point of a special election. If someone leaves, there really is no point. And like I said, it's just, yeah.
Nilsa?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to be here. It's just been my collective experience. I've been on this board for a long time. Those positions are very hard to fill. I think that people don't know what the positions are supposed to be, don't actually have the working knowledge, even on how to do minutes in some instances, whether that's the assistant secretary. The word treasurer leads people to think in a certain way, which is not what the function of the treasurer here does. The treasurer works in tandem with the district manager to give reports on the expenses of the city budget. It is not the job of the treasurer to tell the office how to spend their money. We are not collecting monies of the friends. We had an account of friends at one point. So we really have to think about what the treasurer role is. There are other boards, as I gave you, that do not have the assistant positions. They have first vice chairs, second vice chairs, a secretary, And if we don't have the assistant secretary position, because it's very hard to fill it, then they don't wanna be part of it. Or they're not available, they're absent, if the secretary is absent, just a whole host of, like Asher is saying. If that's the case, there may be a mechanism where if the secretary is not here to do minutes, maybe the vice chair can do minutes. If there's a clear delineation of how you would deal with the responsibilities of those positions in case someone is absent, that would be better. If you look, or it should be considered. Because I've been here for a long time and I have not seen an assistant secretary or an assistant treasurer. You know, you have to pull teeth on the floor when you're doing elections, when no one volunteers and say, well, I volunteer this person. Oh, okay, I'll do it if there's nobody else. And that's been the general feeling that I get, that nobody wants to do those positions.
Okay, since you're here, Xavier, then Michelle. Sorry, Michelle, that I keep pushing you.
Just to clarify, people think there hasn't been an election. An announcement was made in March about us having to hold elections. There was a question raised in the conference. Nilsa is the elections committee chair. For our bylaws, the last committee would be convened. We are missing one member, and I'm waiting for a response from the new member on whether they want to participate and get involved, learning more about how we operate. The reality is in our conversation, the question was raised regarding, given the time remaining and we're considering removing 2 positions, what are our obligations under the bylaws? Do we follow the bylaws, the document as it is now, which we should technically, or do we just go and see who signs up to do it, or just hold on? So, these were some of the things that we had a conversation with, so I'm waiting for a reply on that, and then can tell those Nelson. So, thank you.
All right, I'm gonna go to Michelle, just because she's had her hand up, then Jose. Michelle, floor is yours.
Thank you for giving me the floor, new co-chairs. I appreciate everything that everyone has said. However, I would like to piggyback on what Jewel Jones had mentioned, that it is important to bring in more people into leadership positions. And when people, and also the way that Nilsa had said about packaging things, it really is a wonderful way to package it where people understand exactly what the role is, and that is just and it is used as a stepping stone to help people to realize what it feels like to be in a leadership position within the CB11 community. I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, I don't want to make every point this long. As we were talking, I thought, Kenneth, maybe some good homework. We'll go through some of these, but maybe we start a Google Doc and everybody can kind of put their opinions on each of these. So then we're not going to agree on everything, and that's why we're going to vote on these things. So we'll kind of see what kind of consensus we have, but we can go through some of them still. So we'll go Jose, then Asher, and then Kenneth. It's up. I'll leave it up to you if you want to go to the timeline, and then we'll come back to some of these.
Let's briefly go to the timeline.
All right, so we'll do Jose, Asher, then timeline.
One of the reasons I raised my hand so I could bump Michelle one more time, just,
Wow.
that's
Well,
my
it didn't
love.
happen.
That's my love for Michelle.
So sweet.
But the other one is mainly like, we also have to be realistic of these positions. Okay, the treasurer, Angel writes a report, the treasurer reads the report. The treasurer's not there, I'm sure Angel or someone else can read this. Okay, that I don't know, I've been on this board, I know what the treasurer does or does not do. We're making this seem like these are like mission critical positions. And I think that we should be realistic. I think, like I said in the beginning, we should use a lot of common sense. And I understand the process of it. I understand it 100% about the succession, but we always can have an emergency vote on it because, like Asher said, like it's hard to fill these spots, right? We don't have for a while, we haven't had a treasurer. And the ship's not burning. Secretary gives attendance, takes attendance. Again, not a super mission critical thing. As she's doing it, Angel's also doing it. Even when I was secretary, we would always compare notes at the end to see there was a mistake. I think this is more about just making the board function, right? Making it functional. That's all I'm thinking.
I think, and then I'll go to Asher, I just think to the members here who are not for removing those positions, maybe in order, like, it might be helpful to then define these positions more clearly. If we want to keep an assistant secretary and assistant treasurer, it's important that there is a line of succession, but that should not be the sole purpose of that position. So maybe there's things we can consider to make those positions actually have more clear responsibilities that they could be assisting the actual treasurer and secretary. Asher?
I just wanna like piggyback a little bit, like just also it's like why we, like these positions are hard to fill. I'm also thinking of the like position that the board is in right now that, like I said, it's so many new people. And we've spoken about this executive that it's so many new people, the turnover is high. We don't have people to fill these positions. And I still am under the position that I believe that if you haven't been here for at least a year, maybe 2 years, like a full term, you can't effectively be in a leadership position. We have the few exceptions of people who have, but I think just in general, as a whole, most things in life, you can't just walk into a place and be a chair or a vice chair. And that's just, or even these positions, the assistant secretary, the assistant treasurer.
Thank you. All right, Derek, absolute last one,
I'll be very quick.
because then we gotta move on. Yeah.
So I think two things I wanted to say, as I say at my job as an assistant principal at a high school, people rise and fall to the expectations that you have for them. I think that we can hold ourselves to really high expectations. I think that's something to keep in mind here. We don't need to go to the lowest common denominator and sort of hollow it out because in the past, people haven't wanted to do these things. And I think the second one is, I think with term limits coming up on the board, I think we're gonna get hit with a tidal wave here. And it's a little bit like, maybe we have our heads in the sand if we're not realizing, like, yeah, there may be a lot of turnover and a lot of new people, but buckle up, because it's only gonna get worse. And I don't think the answer is to not try to cultivate that stuff now, because it's gonna be brutal. And I think you all have to really be thinking about that. And this is a good example. So like you're with Jewel, like you're with Jessica, you're with Sage, around define these roles better, but could really be an opportunity to grow a pipeline.
Thank you, Derek, that's really well taken. Okay, I'll just very briefly lay out for our benefit our timeline. So we want the work of the committee in its totality to end around December 2025, but there's some important caveats to that. So I think in ending around December 2025, it creates a really helpful lead-in for new members. It creates an opportunity for folks to familiarize themselves with all the revisions and additions and things that will be happening throughout. And, obviously some of these categories are a lot more time sensitive. So there will be some revisions that will happen beforehand. It will be in its totality a work in progress, but we want to make sure that we have, and again, to say this point, you may not get something incredibly actionable every single time, but what we do want to at least do is provide a report, provide accountability to the rest of the board that we are working diligently, we're reviewing these things and thinking critically about how we want to change things. Anything else?
Yeah, I think something to consider that could be pressing. I do like your idea of this possibly just being a standing committee too. I think the question is, will it be this group always, and how much do we want to have done? I was kind of on the page with the December timeline, that we have some things, at least this is going to get revised again, right? The idea is to make it last as long as possible. Circumstances, smarter people will come after us with more experience. I think one thing for the timeline thing, and it's a bylaw currently, and I think I've asked, and Angel, correct me if I'm wrong, the 50 days to review something to vote on. My understanding is we could change that. And I think 50 is excessive. That's my opinion. My opinions haven't been going over great tonight, but I'm still gonna have them. That's
Sorry, Dan, what section of the bylaws is that?
last page. Go to A,
26.
Article 9 amendments.
I'm actually glad you brought that up with them, because there's certain things, if we don't decide very soon, for example, election related things, there's just not enough lead time to adopt things.
And I'm sorry, you're not reviewing it in 30 days. I don't know if you're reviewing it on day 40. Our meetings are on a cycle of a month. So if we were to put something on the table this month or next month, where it wouldn't be then voted on full board, but it should at least, we could do that. We could, if we make these meetings early enough, we could, move that cycle up. I don't know what that amount is, but this 50-day thing is, it seems excessive. It seems like it will handcuff this committee, especially on time-sensitive things. That's just my opinion. Sage?
Do we know where this came from? Like why, I don't know if this was added in the most recent iteration of the bylaws committee, but
No.
like 50 seems kind of specific. I'm wondering if there is, I read the community board provisions of the charter, but maybe there's something in there that's like 50 days.
So I asked Angel if there was something in the charter or, that made 50 days. As far as I'm concerned, no, I don't know when. So clearly we know it wasn't the last revision, but it sounds to me like it was something, I guess, that this board had decided at one point or another. I think the question we have to ask ourselves, because we might not be able to ask those people, who knows where they are, maybe some of them are here, is as the current makeup of this board, what do we think? Like, what do we think people need? How long do we need to figure out something as straightforward as, I'll throw out an example. Attendance. One of my ideas was if you come late and you leave early, is that an absence? Do we really need, 50 days to determine something like that? Or does the board need 50 days to pontificate on something like that?
It's at least 50.
At least 50, or that's even worse. I don't know. It's just, I threw that out there because it seemed like a relevant thing to bring up on a timeline, because that does totally affect the timeline. I'm not telling anybody what we should do. I'm just saying it's a discussion worth having, I think. Right? All right, Kenneth, I'm gonna let you call on hands, because I don't want to call. I'm not gonna let you take it. Just tell me to shut up.
There it is.
I have a question. So my understanding would be, as a board, can we vote to suspend that requirement if it was decided we needed something to happen fast? In other words, it's 50, whatever the number is, 50 is high, it should probably be lower, but we have the ability to make decisions about our rules on the fly through a vote of the majority of those. So I don't know if that's helpful or something to consider, but I believe that is that something that could be done if a rule is not working for us? Just putting that out there.
Sorry, point of clarification?
Yes, please, Justin Morris.
Are you suggesting that for the purpose of this committee as it was constituted, intended to conduct business through December, that suggesting to consider suspending the provision that was brought to the attention of the committee by Adem would perhaps facilitate or enable the work of the committee to move through the standard practice of coming to the board monthly, presenting motions and updates in the same manner as the rest of the committees of the board? Is that what you're suggesting?
I'm asking if that's a possibility. Typically in Robert's Rules of Order, if you're taking away the rights of members, which reducing a period of time in which to review something would be reducing the rights of members. So you don't have as much time to review something. That's typically a 2/3 majority. But the city charter states nothing a committee board does can be based on a 2/3 majority. It has to be a 50% majority. And so I'm asking, could you bring to the board saying, we want to be able to move with these things, could we vote to suspend the 50 days?
I think everything's on the table. I think, and correct, Robert's Rules of Order is not, we don't have to follow it right to T. I think we have to figure out certain things that will work, but I think it's a good idea. Go back, I'm sorry.
I think in the interest of acknowledging that these bylaws are currently in effect, I think it's important to recognize the process through which it currently prescribes. So I think we can amend that, but it would have to be 15 or 50 days from when we suggest it to the board. And that can be like,
Yeah, that's correct, that's correct.
I don't think we can like do anything unilaterally without it being based off of this.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, and that's my reading of it as well.
Okay, so that means we wouldn't take any positions till after we come back am I wrong?
I
June?
think you make by June full board.
Is that 50 days?
If you-
Maybe. No,
Yeah,
because we're not taking it.
I mean, that's, yeah, I know it's tough, not to blunt that, it's the kind of thing that would have.
That'll move I think that'll move the December timeline back, but that's fine. I mean, it is what it is. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Asher, and then,
Would this change if we had a meeting, let's say for example, in July? Cause we, like in the time I've been here, we've had a July meeting twice. Would that like constitute calling a July meeting of full board if we had licenses and
I
stuff?
think that's a great point.
Cause we've had July meetings in the past.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think, I don't know, kind of.
I mean, yeah,
That's also like, just like, maybe Xavier.
your point, I think it's beyond the authority of, well, obviously of this committee, that I think, but I don't wanna pine on it too much, but Sherry had something, and then I'll go back to the data.
There is nothing that precludes this committee from doing work in July and August. And that is up to the co-chairs and this committee to coordinate with their staff liaison. And there's nothing that precludes under the bylaws, and again, without getting deep into parliamentary procedure, and I really appreciate the conversation. Your deliverables need a 50-day runway. That's how much time for it to then be, voted on, per as it's written now. Now, one of the points raised by the member, Derek Sampone, is that I would recommend going to city law, just to get clarification, that is what city law is. The queue is long, that's all I'm gonna warn you. But again, that, nothing precludes you from doing the work over the summer. And in fact, I think the previous bylaws committee, which I would recommend you all looking at those minutes from 9-10 years ago, look at those minutes. I think they did meet during the summer, if I recall, but don't quote me on that, so that's.
Thank you, Sherry.
I meant,
Go ahead, Asher. Yeah.
I meant calling like a full board meeting.
Yeah, that's what I thought you
If we
meant.
presented, let's say by, if we presented.
June?
We can present it
June or in June or May, I don't know if we're allowed to call, if you would be allowed to call a full board meeting in August or July, because that will give the 50 days for people to read and go through.
I know executives been called in the summer to make decisions on behalf of the board.
It's just a broader point of clarification, I actually do need to do homework on this, to Xavier's point. So city council has a 50-day review period for many of the things that they do, and I don't know if that's statutory, if that's just a matter of practice, so I'm happy to take on that homework and see what the basis of that is, because it may in fact be something that we cannot, that's a matter of city or local law, we can't, I don't know. Something to keep in mind. And Jose, finally, I'm so sorry.
No worries. No rush. Unless it is mandatory, which you'll
Yeah,
find
well,
out, it's a simple email, and they're pretty responsive.
Yeah.
I would believe, when I became chair of public safety, I purposely developed this habit, which a lot of other committees have now also taken upon, which is basically you hear something this month, you vote on it next month. The reason I did that is when I first became a member, and you're just like in it, and they're just like vote, and you're just not even voting for it. And a lot of new members end up feeling that way, and it's a little overwhelming, right? You're making these decisions for a community, and you're not even sure what you're doing. It would be, as long as it's not in conflict with any charter or other situations, I would think that 30 days is more appropriate. We meet monthly. And that being said, that would be that, let's say we present in May or June, and then you can vote. Well, we would present in May or June. I think it would be rectified like in September, because if we don't meet in July for whatever reason. But I do think that should we change to 30 days just to make sense with our cycle, as long as obviously it doesn't conflict with city.
Right, now. Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, you were recommending.
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
Please.
Yeah, of course.
No, just a kind of conceptual question. Can the executive committee, in the absence of, like generally, if you can't have like a regular meeting,
Yes.
the executive is supposed to be.
It's happened.
Yes.
Yeah, can that be applied to amending the bylaws?
No.
That's
Okay.
2/3.
Okay. That's it.
Okay, so it would have to be a full board meeting called.
Majority
I'm
or
so sorry, Ashley, but yeah, just raise your hand. Sorry, just go ahead.
It will have to be a full board meeting call in order to have anything enacted.
Yeah, that,
So it would not be, cause I don't even know how we got on executive when I asked about full board, it's full board.
Could we call a full board meeting in the summer? I think that was Asher's original question, and I don't know if it's been answered.
I would propose.
We've done it. He's been-
Yeah, the answer is yes.
We've done July.
And we've called meetings, at least with the executive, for not even as big of an issue. And I'm sorry, but last meeting and what's been happening is that we haven't been doing the work of the community because we've been bogged down in all this stuff. I think sentiment to be a little bit expeditious with this, because remember, this is just to enable us to be more effective in doing the work. It's not, so this could be, and we can correct things. I don't think this group's gonna make any terrible decisions. But so, sorry, Jessica. Go ahead, Jessica.
Thank you. So while we're in C, the process, timeline, and deliverables bucket, process and timeline are related, right, critically. And there's timelines embedded in the document we're trying to change, which I think is also something to acknowledge. The operational timelines are something to also consider with regard to the timeline of changes, where we're either going to be, whenever we're able to present changes and vote on them, whenever those changes happen, they will also have to, many of them likely will have to have suggestions for when those changes will take place, or how to transition into that new way of operating, specifically for elections, and some other things. So while the intention of moving fast and breaking things is a good one, I think there are some very consequential things that we want to make sure we don't break along the way. And I'll say that I think the constitution of this committee, meaning it's having been formed, provides then the opportunity to, along with all of the other standing committees, provide feedback, whether it's an informational update or a motion to take action. And I think those are as important of tools as presenting, hey, we're doing this work. We're not ready to vote yet, but we've done X, Y, and Z. If you have questions, ask them now, contribute now, engage now, because, which goes to my point about process, bucketing some of these things that fall into the technical set of sameness for how they're gonna function timeline-wise is gonna be something we wanna think about, because some of them are gonna be more complicated than others. And starting from the top, is maybe not, to have some strategy in thinking about what are the potential consequences of taking action on this bucket of things that act the same way operationally versus what are the, and so to chunk the work, right? I'm getting a blank stare from the den.
No, I'm not, no.
You're following me.
I'm following you. I think what I'll say is, what I'm hearing is a lot of what's being proposed, that there is pushback on it. And a lot of times I feel committee members will, give suggestions or say something and then not really propose an alternative. So I don't think me and Kenneth want to tell everyone how to do this. I think we came up with ideas, and if people have suggestions on how to improve our ideas, we're open to it, but then tell us exactly how, if you don't think it works in buckets, then say how you would think. Don't just say it to us and then we gotta come back with everything and decide it. If you're gonna give a suggestion, which is great, add context to the suggestion. And I think, to your other point, I agree with you. Some of this is very complicated. Some of these things are gonna not be voted on right away, but some of them, there's been this low-hanging fruit discussion, that, maybe some things, don't need to be vetted out as much, but I think that's what you're saying, yeah.
And then to kind of wrap up the can of worms that I opened and put the
You didn't
cap
open
on,
a can of worms,
right?
it's
So
fine.
to sort of put the cap back on for a bit, right, with a little
Yeah,
twist, not
alright.
like one of those pickle
It's alright.
dragons, but to acknowledge that making more work for ourselves by making more changes is not necessarily helpful. So, if it ain't broke, is it really broken, is what we're kind of
I
here
agree.
to ask in some ways. Do we really need to fix this, or do we need to shift our culture in some way, in a sort of positive direction? So I think we can, we can come back to it if we try and we fail in some way, but we don't have to necessarily make more work if it's not.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. I think, like, to say this whole document needs to be torn up and, I mean, you're talking about, like, if it's not broke, don't fix it. There's things in here I think that are fine the way they are, and what you said, it might be more cultural or just how things have been running that are the issue than the bylaws themselves in all cases. For the sake of moving it, right, Kenneth, I think we'll go Asher, Jose, and then we'll go back to 2. I would like to spend, maybe, Kenneth, you agree, like a half an hour on that, because then the last item doesn't seem like it'll be that long, all right? So Asher, Jose, and then we'll go back to number 2 on the agenda.
I would say just because there has been so much arguments with this process, if we stick to the policy that we have, that also it seems like city council follows the 50 days, there's ways we could work around that, like I said, calling a summer full board meeting, there's no way we could go wrong, and then we don't wanna, since we've been entrusted to do this, we don't want anyone questioning us or anything, so just stick with the policy and nothing will, there still will be stuff that goes wrong, but it's also like, it's, we don't wanna open the door for us to have people saying we rushed this through or something like that.
A fair point.
Mine was just a point of clarification. This reads as 50 calendar days, right? Or it's not business days. Just wanna make sure because
There's calendar.
it doesn't specify either. It reads like calendar days and.
Kenneth, did you say, I don't want to give you homework, but I think you gave it to yourself.
I did give myself homework.
And I think you are very equipped to do this. I think, you could find out if this 50-day thing is something we actually have to abide by, and then in that process, is it 50 calendar days? Is it 50 business days? We don't have to decide that tonight. I think it's just
Yeah,
worth
just
looking
filter it
into.
No, it's a good thing to know. My guess is that it is calendar, just because other statutory things operate that way, but either way, I'm happy to take this on.
Okay. All right, Jessica, and then we're gonna go back to number 2.
Real simple point of, I've been assuming that this committee will be represented by either its chair or by one of its chairs in the committee reports, and will present business to the full board in the same manner that all of the committees do. Is that correct?
That's correct,
That's our goal.
and that goes to your point of, like, we're gonna have updates. So like you said, we might not have voted on something, but these are the positions this committee is taking on these things. So they're like aware, I don't want the motion on the floor and it was like, wait, when was that?
So it starts.
Yeah, so they know, like, if we
That
take
starts the
position,
clock.
yeah, that starts the clock. So, yeah, and then who does that? I think I'm gonna be presenting an executive, but that
I'm happy to
doesn't,
do full board.
but that doesn't, right, and then maybe you do it at full board, I like that. All right, Xavier, and then I don't care whose hand goes up, we're going to 2, because that's just how we have to move.
Procedurally, once this committee, so the 2 things, procedurally, yes, you'll report back at May's executive on what was discussed at this meeting. Procedurally, when this committee votes on all the recommendations, the 50-day clock starts. When it comes to the full board presentation, and what should be observed in best practices, like when our elections committee takes over, the chair cedes the floor and hands it over to the elections chair. Similarly, what will be done is the bylaws chairs, the chair will cede the floor, and the bylaws chairs will come up and show the final presentation post 50 days. So that's what will happen. So I hope that clarifies, yes.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, is this, that seems different from what's written down here.
Well,
Is that
they
like-
vote on it, but procedurally, we haven't observed what should have been. So what that says right there, like the elections committee, like what we have observed in best practice is the chair does not run the elections process. It's a-
All right, we said no more hands, so we, for the sake,
It's a clarification.
So,
oh, I mean, okay, go ahead.
But what is actually written, cause I.
We're gonna
best
have-
Practice.
Yeah,
so
I'm not
that's
for
all.
best practice. I'm back.
more than happy with.
Yeah, like, because there is a need for expediting this if it's within the rules.
If I could say, I talked to Floyd, and I'm waiting for a response, that's how they verbally relayed, and I'm waiting for a
Well,
response.
can we get that
I know
then?
we've been in
As soon
discussions
as I
with
get
this.
that.
But like pressing to get it, okay. All right, Kenneth, you mind now if we go back to 2 and I'll read?
Yeah.
All right, so we were on the proposed revisions for March 18th. That's a lot, and I think when we get to D, we could touch on a few. We're gonna, I think, 30 minutes, and then D is quick, because that's gonna be like kind of homework. So we'll do more of that work while we're not here. Let's go to this email. It's a shorter document, I
Yeah,
think.
there's 3 tranches of things that we like.
You wanna go to number 1?
Yeah, okay, perfect.
Can you clarify?
Sorry.
Yes.
That Xavier dated, well, it's your other printout, but for the record, it was sent
Jessica, do you want-
Thursday, May 1st, 2025 at 11:09. I'll do this some minute now. 11:19 a.m. It was, no, I appreciate that. I skip ahead sometimes. It was, email from the chair of the board, Xavier Santiago. Full disclosure, he sent it a little bit before to me and Kenneth, and then he circulated it to the full board. I'm not gonna read the whole email, but essentially, these were some recommendations that he proposed. So I think what I'll read into the record, the first one, and I do want to hear some opinions on this, okay? All right, so I'll read it in full. Shifting the election day to align prior to appointments. Although the current proposal would not align fully with our appointment schedule and leaves the risk of losing an officer for 2 months, a solution was made by Nilsa at the last executive committee meeting. She discussed truncating the next term from 2 years and reducing it to a 1 year or at most 14 months. This would allow a transition period as a one-off. Depending on the scenario, the election date could shift accordingly. There are various options to reduce the odds of needing a special election should an officer be termed out. However, the reality is that a special election will always remain a distinct mathematical possibility with 2-year terms. This proposal would slightly reduce those odds and refine the alignment. Okay, questions, comments? Jose, and I was going Jose, Sage, Asher, Nilsa.
So, this is all due to term limits, right? The issue I have, right, that's the problem we have, and it's not in our bylaws because it didn't exist at the time. And we discussed this actually in office oversight. The issue that we have is that it's not a solution that kind of fixes things in perpetuity. And I think we're looking for a solution that fixes things in perpetuity. When we were in office oversight, the other solution that was presented was that if someone is term limited, they simply can't run. That's like the other side of this, right? And as we said, there's different solutions. But, you know, what I like about that one is that that one fixes the problem going forward, right? Which is the whole point of the bylaws, not having like special cases, but simply fixing the problems. And we spoke this in large at office oversight, like consistently, and we went back and back. But it is a way of dealing with the situation, which is what the bylaws stand for. That's all. I just want to.
So just to clarify, are you saying that when you say term limited, you mean if an officer can't serve the full 2-year term that they were elected for, they wouldn't be able to
Well, they
run?
couldn't run
Okay.
if they can't finish it.
Okay,
Because otherwise the board gets put in a position every once in a while, depending on the individual. If the individual is term limited, then we need to have a special election. Mind you, if it's chair, then the vice chair would step up, but then we would have to have a special election for the vice. So either way, we would need a special election.
no, so you want to clarify?
I just wanted to clarify that whole thing. So this was, when I was studying the bylaws of the different community boards, and you will see, there's one community board who did something specific for 2025 because they took into account the transition.
Do you know what board that is?
I think it's CB5, maybe.
I remember you saying it was CB5.
Right, and so what they did was they called a special election for that point in time to then set it, and it's only for that one time only, and then it will move forward the way it regularly does. And so what I have brought up, and I have mentioned also in office oversight, that there are different things that, the bylaws committee could consider. For instance, if you decide to go by the regular terms the way it is right now, and you don't have enough time to change the November elections and stuff like that, you could truncate, you could do something where for 2025 only, for 2026, that the term is reduced for 1 year and specify that it's a special one-time off. The following year, after that first year, so for instance, let's say I wanna run.
But you would run in this November
You
and,
will run in this November and only have a year, and that would be put in the bylaws for this special election only. In 2026, you could then move forward the way you always do with a 2-year election and not have to change your terms. That was one suggestion.
what if someone runs and they're gonna be termed off in 6 months or a
Right,
year?
but then they wouldn't run.
So then why don't we put that rule in place now, is what he's saying?
You can.
That
So
sounds cleaner,
was just
doesn't
an
it?
option, if it is then 2 terms, then you would have to just make sure that you change, like as soon as you can. Because we would have an election starting September, we would start an elections committee for nominations unless you change the date of the election.
Well,
You see what
but I think what he's saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you just make it where you can't run, if you can't serve out a full 2-year term, this would never be a problem.
Right, we didn't have a problem like that.
No, and I agree. So if you're gonna put that, because right now the current bylaw says 3 terms and it doesn't mention anything about that.
Fair
So
enough.
if you're gonna
Because
do
the term
that,
limits that exist.
right, so if you're gonna do that because of term limits, then that's something that should be on the front end. Because that's something that will affect your election.
Well, yeah, I think the election, yeah, I'm not saying, it's a suggestion, I think.
No, I think it's a great, I personally, I've always said that I think of 2 terms is enough, because of the duties and things like that, so
There are things that preclude, I think, people from running, in all our elections, right? Like up and down the chain, from
Right.
president down to here. I think it's just something to think about, and that's why I think we mentioned why some things are more pressing than others. Was it Sage, then Asher?
Yeah, no, I agree with Jose. I think, I understand the logic of it, but I don't see why do it one time when the same situation can happen anytime in the future. One maybe alternative but I don't know what I think about it yet, I'm just putting it out there. 1-year officer terms in general.
a lot of boards do that.
I will say that's a great idea. I think just in the spirit of what Jessica said, like if it's not broke, don't fix it, but maybe there is a reason to think it's broken, 2 years. But it's another clean solution. I will agree with you on that.
Sort of part of my thinking behind that is just because we have people rotating in and out every year. I think it's just if somebody comes in an odd year, their participation is going to be different than somebody who comes in during the election cycle.
Yeah, no, and that's why the idea was, because theoretically, anyone who joins, the idea that we've thrown out is you couldn't run for office for 2 years. And then if you're reappointed whether it's, my only issue with a 1-year thing is it doesn't lend to continuity. By the time the person steps in and this and that, and then we go on break for 2 months, I don't think they've had enough of an opportunity. And I don't know why this would become an issue now. I don't know that anyone serving 2 years has been an issue. Just because other boards do it, I don't think it makes it better. Asher, Jessica?
All right, I'm gonna bring up what I brought up during executive in terms of this, is that the idea to move the appointments, the elections to May. I know there was a argument that as new board members won't know what's going on, but if you were appointed to a board, you're expected to know what's going on. You're expected to be going to meetings. And I think just moving it to line up with the appointments makes sense. But also adding on top you shouldn't be able to run if you can't serve the full term, because people are on different appointments. There's some who were appointed on odd years, some who were appointed on even years. So even if it is not everyone is gonna term out at the same time who is elected. So it's not just one special election, it will be multiple.
all the
like a
time.
whole bunch, it will be like a consistent special election thing, and really the special election is there for a like last case scenario. So I just think just to keep it like straight and just simple is you shouldn't be able to. I think just combining everything that was said, it should be a 1-year term. You shouldn't be able to run if you can't stay for the whole term, and move it to May. Because there's no reason why, like, that we have to have it in November. Different boards have it at different times. So,
Okay, Jessica, Nilsa?
So my first board appointment was to fill a vacancy, and it was a 1-year appointment, which was confusing and a lot of applying, it seemed, in a short period, which felt like not a good thing, but suggesting that doing this thing that seems like an onerous undertaking called elections, constituting a committee and moving through that process together as a board, whenever we do it, it's great. You know, there's a process involved, and I think you get to know people running, and so, you know, if they're in one-year terms would make that happen more often. It may also normalize it as a part of our operations, and it may allow that sort of pipeline to leadership to open up to new appointees sooner, while it also solves this issue of potentially having danglers, right, at one end or another, or prohibiting running because you're gonna term out. So, you know, I appreciate that it's been brought up as something to consider, while also shifting, you know, considering shifting the dates. I think even though it seems like more work for the board, it just, it may reduce the anomalies that could come up because the operations are a cycle that is more regular in the long term.
Okay, Nilsa, then Asher.
Something just clicked when Asher was speaking. I'll give you an example. When I ran for chair of the board, the first time I ran, I could only serve part of my term because I had to reapply. Right, so, and then when I got reappointed, there was continuity because there was nothing happening. So just to bring up that, because you're talking about the 2-year, that to make it, you know, like to make it clear that you can serve the 2 years or put a mechanism in there that you recognize, like somebody's not cycling off, like me, so I shouldn't run.
But then you wouldn't have to issue those. So if you're not cycling off.
Because of the way we're appointed, which speaks to Ash's point about the,
No,
when people get elected.
Yeah, but we're talking about the term limits where you can't get reappointed, more so than, I understand what you're saying now.
Okay.
You're saying like, we're in the middle of a cycle, he won, but he's going to get
Right.
most likely, most of the time, unless
You
you
do it.
ask not to go back on the community board,
Right.
you get put back on the
They're
community.
not gonna remove a sitting
It's only
chair.
when you're at the
We
term
did a
limit.
science experiment last year and I didn't respond to anything, I didn't do anything. For whatever reason, my name, they leave it off of the interview. They never call me, even though I reach out and I let them know so that they can't tell me that I didn't let them know. But they, you know, I understand what you're saying. We're talking more in terms of like term limitations where that person can't come back.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, all right, Asher?
but the whole thing is, like, moving it to 1 year, yes, that helps, but also, let's say someone, it is now November, and someone is running again, it's a 1-year term, but they term out in 6 months, that still doesn't solve the problem. I think moving the elections to June, like right before we leave, and like, you know, like May and June, because at that point, we know who is coming back, and it helps with the continuity of it all, because like I said, it could be November and someone turned out in May, or someone's gonna turn out the next May.
But what he was, so I'll just circle back to the original point that was made. If you say that you can't run, if you can't serve out the full 2 years, because you would be term limited off, not because, you know, you might be up for
Well,
reappointment.
that's what I meant,
Right, so if if, like, look, the 1 year idea is fine. Maybe that's the idea moving forward. But what he said was, if you're not term limited off, you can run. If you could serve the full 2 years or 1 year, whichever one it ends up, maybe we decide on changing it. That would actually fix the problem in perpetuity, whether we kept the elections in even in November, because, you know, for the sake of what Jessica said about, you know, getting people involved and everything, I agree with Asher. If you're gonna join this board, you should kind of be aware of what you're doing, whatever. But if we have a spring election, then that whole elections process leading up to that election, those members were not a part of. And I think that's why it always was done this way when I'm thinking about it, is because you're appointed in the spring, we go on summer break, then we have an elections process where what you're saying is you come on the board, you should know what's going on, but you miss the elections process. If you're getting appointed lately, when do appointments have been happening? In May?
In May now, right?
We had an opportunity to do this year, and we knew this was coming. So the question is also, why wasn't this thought about sooner, to have a spring election this time, and it avoided this? It was mentioned, no, but the issue was the 50-day thing. But, and my point is, this was no surprise. We voted on this years ago, right? Not us, the city put it on the ballots. We knew that this was coming now. So the question is, why wasn't this brought up in a timeline where the 50 days wouldn't have been an issue? So we could have a June election or a May election or an April election.
And I think also the 12-month might help with some of the engagement, because it feels less of a huge commitment than the 2 years. And also it's a good check-in with the board to see like how stuff doing, like let's say someone's in like the secretary position and they've been doing it for a year, and they're now, because a lot could change in someone's life within 2 years. So it's like, it also helps just with the continuity, like always having someone wanting to do it.
I agree with you. I think just the idea to consider, if 1 year is considerable, 2 years is considerable. I think I'm in the spirit of what you're saying, like not to leave somebody in too long. That's why 3 terms might be too much. I'm for 2 terms, maybe even 1 term of 2 years. The only reason that the 2 years, I'm speaking as just a member, my opinion, there's a reason why I don't think any elected position in this country is for 1 year. Congress is 2 years, right? Senate 6 years, president's 4 years. There's just not a lot you can get done in a year. We also don't meet for 2 months. 10 months to step into a position, get your feet under you, and then if we're cycling, let's say we're voting on a new person a year from then there is really actually no continuity with the board. So that's just and then I'm not saying anything else. Yeah.
I'll go ahead, Sage, and then.
I'll say the positions you mentioned, I think are 2 years because you're likely to face a challenger, because a lot of people want to run for Congress, a lot of people want to run for president. I think when it comes to the community board, like maybe a handful of people would challenge a chair that was elected within like the last year, but for the most part, like I'm pretty sure Xavier was unopposed last time he ran.
And I don't think that's a good thing. I think the presumption that
I think Xavier was unopposed both times.
Yeah, and so we shouldn't change rules because people haven't stepped up. I think we should be encouraged, and I mean, I hear what you're saying completely, because that's what happened. But I didn't feel good voting into, not just Xavier. It was, I think this last time, every position was unopposed.
Yeah, and the first one that I went to, it was, I think only one was.
So step up, Nilsa, you said the bench is empty?
The bench is empty.
But then why is the bench empty?
Exactly.
And that should, and if the bench is empty because there hasn't been this and that, then people need to step up. People need to step up. It shouldn't be that way.
Both of my elections, I had
So,
challenges.
I think-
Sorry.
And
And it made you probably a stronger leader.
then Derek and then Nelson.
I agree with Asher, but I do think we have to separate them now. Because of time constraints, right? This was brought in earlier, it was not done. Now, changing the elections honestly just doesn't matter at this particular point, because we're already in rain. Right? I do agree going forward, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense for considering we start from September. Like, it all makes sense. It's just that we're kind of handicapped right now because we can't do it anymore. So, but we should think about moving forward doing it. You can also do it earlier. Doesn't have to necessarily be in May. You're worried about so much about someone walking in and voting brand new. you could do it in April, you could do it in March, we could choose. But I do think term limits are the biggest issue we have, is what I mentioned that.
I'm so sorry, you gotta go more, no, please continue.
Yeah,
sorry.
and I do agree the 2 years, I mean, I've, been in positions with other committees, like, it's hard to get a lot done in a year, right? So just to consider that, because as you're running something, it takes a while, first couple months is just getting used to people, making changes, and then that time flies by, we're already in May.
Thank you, and then actually Derek is next, and then Nilsa, and we'll come back to the table.
I wanted to say, I think Deb's got a point around like the multiple years, but also like limits and all of that. But I do wanna say like, while the chair certainly has some powers that the rest of us don't, for the purposes of like voting on things, they are equal to us. They're more akin to the Speaker of the House than they are, an elected representative.
They don't vote.
Is that-
They often don't vote.
That's
They
true,
take that
that's true.
position that they don't have to not vote.
Or there was things passed out.
They should vote.
They're needing to be a vote, agreed. And so I do think that's just something to put out there, like the goal of the chair, and maybe this can continue to be better defined in the bylaws, is like to run effective meetings, right? To set people up for success, and not necessarily like a powerful position in and of itself.
I agree.
And I think better educating people about that can address the empty bench, right? And can do some of those things as well. And so I encourage you, with respect to the election and term limits, like to really think about how to support the continuity of that role, so that we're not having to train a new person on a regular basis just so that we can like run meetings that don't take like 3 hours and we're getting thrown out of the place because you've been there for so long. Like, I think that is an important piece. And so that's my 2 cents on like the term limits and like how long we should.
Thank you, Deb. And then Nilsa next, and I will go back to the table. I just want to note for the group that it's now 8:11, and I do want us to try to synthesize what we're talking about.
Yep.
Welcome back to
Yep.
that. Go ahead, Nilsa.
Right, I just want to say that I agree that 1-year terms may not be adequate. I did it for 4 years, and chose not to do the third term. And that's why I'm saying that 4 years may be more than enough, because a viewpoint skews certain things, and the people get lazy, right? Like, nobody steps up because they figure, oh, I don't have a chance, or this is an incumbent, or things like that. So just things to think about that I think, in my opinion, 2 terms is enough. I don't think right now you have to change the cycle, it's up to you, as long as you put in
We can't change
something
the
down, right?
I think we can.
I think everything, I think,
I'm sorry, folks.
sorry.
Nilsa, have you?
I'm out of order.
Have you?
Yes.
Everything's on the table is what I would say, right? Everything's on the table?
At this rate, yeah, it has to be. Okay, I'm sorry, so we're back to the table. Jessica, go ahead. I think I missed some hands before that, so Asher after Jessica. Was that the right order? I apologize.
Yeah.
I didn't see. Okay, please.
Just to say, the thought that we may have missed an opportunity or missed a window, that is, I think, bringing things forward. There's also the potential for pushing things back, right? If you're shifting when an election happens, you can extend. I imagine we can find a way to extend a set of terms, to then get on a new cycle, instead of, waiting for however long it would be, to happen. So there's, if you don't do it one way, you can do it another way. That's a point of consideration.
Thank you, Jessica. Go ahead, Asher.
I think just when we are in the talk of term limits and just everything regarding like responsibilities of these positions, I think that we need to even out the power and responsibilities a little bit, for more just for if like a chair isn't there, the vice chair assumes the role of the chair fully, because it's, as the way it's written now, it's just if the chair isn't there, it's a problem. And I think also it's just, it will help for also it not be all on the chair. Like I said, vice chair is just within committees and within the board, it feels more like just a title than actually having some responsibility and function in how the board runs. It's more we get a report from these positions and that's about it. I think also it will help I'm not gonna speak for the staff, it will help the staff a little bit if there's more like responsibilities placed on it. And I think we can't change the election cycle now, but I think we could very much put in place, if we have a summer full board meeting, that's enough time for us to be like, before the elections, that no one should run this time unless they could serve out the full term. And then we could deal with the placement of stuff later on.
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
I'll say, I don't think, because I'm like, sticking to the bylaws, I don't think we can amend the bylaws, without the 50-day window, except, if executive board acts on the board's behalf. There's nothing in here that says that's limited to things that don't have like a 2/3 adjustment. But in terms of elections, we could do an election right now if the officers resigned and we just held a special election, which could happen with just like 5 days' notice, I think.
But that's once again, that's playing around a little bit too much with like the actual policy that we have in place. I think that could be a little bit treading certain waters. I truly think, like I said, we have the capability for the 50 days to be put in place for certain things if we have a full board meeting in the summer. I know it's a lot to have a full board meeting in the summer, but we signed up to do work. I think if we give enough notice, we can have a full board meeting in either July or August. We've had executive meetings in August with literally like 2 weeks' notice. I don't think.
We've met in July before.
We've met in July with
Yeah.
executive.
And full
met in
board.
Full board, I've been to 2 full boards at least in the time I've been on here in July.
Okay, my point was only about the election.
Yeah, I heard you.
Yeah, but I'm bringing up that.
Yeah, and you made a, yeah,
So can we pause discussion for just a brief moment?
Yeah.
Do we feel like we've arrived at some deliverables and or informational things that we can provide? I think one thing that sounds like it's percolating is, which folks won't like maybe, but having a full board meeting in the summer. Is that something that sounds like we've coalesced around as something that needs to happen in order for this course to continue? I suppose that's
Sorry,
a
quick-
motion for that, right? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just wanna clarify, do we have grounds, like solid, grounds
not this month, but maybe next month.
as to why that would be necessary? Like, do we have enough proof that we need that to ask for it? Is that?
I think this discussion is,
Okay.
Does no one go on vacation?
But we've had.
Well, we just need a quorum. We don't need everyone to be here. Look, I mean, I agree with what Jessica's saying in that maybe we don't
The
know.
answer is yes.
Right, but like maybe if in June, right, if we end up actually taking positions on certain things, then maybe in August, full board meeting is necessary. Maybe it's not
I mean,
necessary.
even if we pass it in September, it would.
Even September,
Well, for the
fine. I
election,
mean, I don't see there
so it
being
wouldn't-
that much of a rush,
It
but
would be fine either way.
Derek, you go ahead.
Yeah, so are you saying for the purposes of presenting something in July, so the 50 days?
Yeah,
You present June.
yeah.
It's for that, not for the purposes of voting.
Well, we could present theoretically in
Like you're
June.
trying on something,
We could
right?
present in June,
I
And
believe
then vote on it in
Xavier,
August.
right.
I believe Xavier clarified that the 50 days starts when this committee takes an action.
That's correct.
So then we could,
That's not correct.
So it's
Yeah,
not-
what
That's
is
not
correct,
correct.
Angel?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Angel,
That
what
is
is
what was
correct?
stated though.
It's when it's sent to the members.
Sent to the
Right.
members.
So we could take positions in our June bylaw committee. We can send the positions out to the members essentially immediately. And then the 50 days would kick off from that June meeting. And then that would maybe require a summer meeting. But I think it all depends on what we do in June. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
We send our preparation to, that's the.
Is there any difference between August and September?
I don't think there's that much of an urgency. I think if people go on vacation and stuff, and I mean, the ideal thing would be to have as many people here to hear this as possible, then maybe September. I don't think there's a gun to our heads, for lack of a better term, that says we can't do this.
And it's the chair who calls that, right?
Angel, Asher,
No.
Asher, Angel.
And it's the chair of the, just to clarify, because I read the bylaws, it's the chair of the board who would call that full board
Yeah, I'm
meeting.
pretty sure that's what it
It's
is.
not basically,
We don't make a
I thought it was
motion.
kind of insinuated. People
No,
like
someone said
insinuated
that.
It was like, we do it here, I'm like, no, that's the chair who does that.
We don't have to make a motion to have a summer meeting. The chair can determine if that's necessary based on what this committee does. Angel?
So please read the bylaws, because the chair calls meetings, but not exclusively. The members can call for a meeting, and it has to be voted on. There's a number of things that have been discussed tonight. So what's essentially happened is you've painted yourselves, the body has painted itself into a corner that now requires the consideration of a summer meeting, and now there's apprehension about having summer meetings. We have had summer meetings, and more than likely we'll have a summer meeting this year, because there's work that the board wants to weigh in on and doesn't want to waive review of, for example, licenses and permits. We're more than likely going to see a ULIP application coming in the next couple of weeks, so that may necessitate a summer meeting. If there are items in the bylaws that could potentially require sooner rather than later action, I don't see any reason why this body can't make a recommendation for the board to consider, even with that 50 days. In my opinion, that 50 days is entirely too much, and unless it says it explicitly in the sections relating to 2 community boards that we have to wait 50 days, then I think that can be changed. I've reviewed the bylaws of all the community boards in Manhattan and a couple in Brooklyn, and none of them have this 50 days. So for that reason alone, I would have a little bit of doubt as to that requirement. I want to see that 2/3 inch you referenced, Derek, because I never heard that before. I'd be curious to know that. It might be in certain circumstances and not in other circumstances, but I'm curious if you could share that, that'd be great. This body has heard through its executive meeting for 3 months now, a number of recommendations, a couple of them that could be considered timely, that now it seems we're out of time on. And if you wait a little longer, then you'll be out of time on. So I would encourage you all, just like Adem and Kenneth did, to read the bylaws for yourself. It is very important. The custom and culture have been referenced. It's very important for this body, in my estimation, to know its own rules and know its own procedures. This body defers entirely too much to the chair of the board and the chair of the committee, and the body tends to kind of just hang around and not knowing much and relying on, hey, chairperson this, chairperson that, district manager this. What is this rule? What is this thing? Read it for yourself. Don't just rely on us to tell you. Because, a couple of things have been said this evening that are incorrect, right? And we're supposed to be looking at the rules of the board. That's something you should be aware of, right? If we're going to continue with wrong information, we're going to continue to, how can we get to the right thing, right? So yeah.
All right, I'm gonna go I'm going Asher, Xavier, and then I think let's go to D, because I think what we say in D can determine how fast we can start doing things in part, okay? Asher, Xavier.
I have a question about the practice and whatever that was mentioned, and kind of how this whole conversation started. There was, I'm now losing my focus.
It's okay, take your time.
Yeah, but what we keep seeing, common practice and stuff like that, what exactly is written? Because for the I think it was the 50 days that was mentioned as common practices.
No,
that's written. No, that's not.
It's a written.
Come back to me.
It's okay. Xavier, and then we'll circle back to Asher.
Just to clarify, thank you, as it says in Amendment 9 on amendments, Article 9, it says these bylaws may be amended by 2/3 vote of members present and voting at any regular meeting of the board, provided that a copy of such proposed amendments has been at least 50 days prior to the vote to amend these bylaws, received by all members, open parentheses, with such receipt being confirmed in writing by such member, close parentheses, or in such event such receipt is not able to be so confirmed, except by certified mail to any such member.
We should put email in here.
So.
Okay.
That allowed us to send, as we've done in the past, where we send the email and the person says, yes, I've received it. So otherwise, we used to have to do this for historical context. We used to have to mail, and Angel, you recall, when George, it was tedious for the task to have to receipt certify a whole bunch of copies.
Okay, Asher?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, just bringing that up to that, I was looking back at when we were originally working on this in executive and it was sent out. It was sent out to the whole board, it wasn't just executive.
That's
These
true.
revisions were sent out. So are we technically within that 50 days? No, we're not.
It didn't follow the procedure, I
It
think that
didn't
it
follow
needed to.
exactly, that was more like a clarification, yeah.
Oh, okay, so but I hear what's being, let's move to D, Kenneth, if you don't mind. Because we could be here all night,
Yeah.
but I think if we assign homework, right, one is read the bylaws if you haven't. Two is, there are proposed revisions, there are proposed and recommendations from our chair and from our vice chair. And I think that we should, maybe, Angel, we could set up a Google Doc with each one, and we can, I think it shows who made what suggestions. So you go through them, we can have all of our suggestions on those. There have been suggestions that the board has received. Now, I know it didn't set the 50 days off, but there's been ample opportunity to actually look at them. I don't see any reason why this committee can't start taking action if we do our homework for this month, for next month. That doesn't mean everything, right? But I think, I don't think, this was a good introductory meeting. I think it went long, but it had to. I don't think we were meant to take any positions on anything, but I think the homework needs to be done. Jesse, I'll call on you, but yeah, and then Kenneth, and okay, I don't have to call him Kenneth, but the idea here is, I think we need to meet for some time. And besides that homework of commenting on these existing recommendations and reading the bylaws, that maybe we'll assign more specific tasks to the actual committee members.
There's one thing I do want to give everyone homework here. I think of a reasonable due date, but definitely before we meet. And hopefully it's pretty easy, but I'd like every committee member to share with them and I either your thematic interests. So for example, like Adem mentioned, elections, attendance, the roles of officers and staff, procedure, or if you prefer, you can go by the page number, the article number of the bylaw. Let us know, your particular area of focus. And I'd like to have everyone in the committee send that to us so we can have a framework to move forward.
Can we get a clear date for that? So it's not.
I think,
Yeah,
why don't
I wanna be reasonable, so yeah,
why don't we
it's-
meet, like, we'll figure our schedule, but me and Kenneth, can we meet this week?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, and then we'll give that homework out by this
Yeah,
week.
you'll all get it in an email.
Yeah, we'll give you ample time, we'll be reasonable. Jessica?
Sorry, the committee meets monthly. Is that standard practice, or is that something that should be considered as a different frequency every third week, or something that may move the work forward in a critical point of time?
So this has been discussed before this meeting, and I think that we're totally open to having meetings more frequently than our normal committees do. I think we have to figure out what people's availability is, what dates work, which I think, we'll give out enough,
Include it in the same email.
yeah, and we'll give out enough options so that, people aren't like, oh, that's the only date, it doesn't work for me. So, yeah, Kenneth, do you have any, I don't know. Do you have any other ideas?
You know what's very clear, I think everyone here is incredibly passionate about the future of our board, and I think that's really important and that really matters. And I appreciate you all taking the time to do this work. Yeah, that's it for me.
All right, so there obviously can be no old business. New business, I don't think, everything was new. All right, Angel, if you take roll.
Jose Alfa Morano,
Present.
Dan Bria,
Present.
Kenneth Crouch,
Sorry, I was late in here.
Jill Jones,
Here.
Sage Mason, Jessica Morris, Valerie Ponte, Asher Rodriguez,
Present.
Rock Martin.
Then it was within 10 minutes. That's not considered.